Hi, welcome to our live chat this afternoon. Our YOSA live chat today is with Dr. Kristin Hayes, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. We're super happy to have you all here. I'm YOSA Music Director Troy Peters, and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. So Dr. Hayes, we're so happy to have the chance to chat with you. You are the director of the YOSA Flute Choir. And how long have you been with YOSA?
Oh my goodness. I think this is my 5th year since 2015, November 15, I think it was. I was happy to step in for Martha Long, who was the founder of the flute choir and who had established a really great tradition in such a short time. So it was an honor to take over, and it's probably one of my favorite things that I get to do ever. So youth orchestra was really important to me as a child, and I only got to do it for 1 year because it was really competitive. There was one orchestra, so most everyone was a senior, and so to be able to provide that opportunity, not only through many different orchestras, but specifically through the flute choir where younger students can be involved, is just incredibly important to me.
Well, and you mentioned this one of many things you do. You, like a lot of musicians, you have a kind of a portfolio of things you do. And so you teach at a university, and you teach privately, and you play Baroque music, and you play in a contemporary music duo with a percussionist who is also a dear close friend of yours and mine. Um, and and you play in orchestras as a freelancer. You are on the YOSA faculty. So what is that like, to piece together so many different elements in a musical life? Do you enjoy the variety of it?
Absolutely. I think when I was in college, I had lots of desk jobs, and I have a lot of respect for that. But I need the variety. It's very exciting to me to have many different outlets for my creativity, and just different circles of friends and networks. And yeah, I certainly didn't think when I was in school that I would be doing this many things, because I think one of the things that we're taught is to focus on getting really good at one thing. And so I think that restraint has kind of blossomed into me wanting to do lots of different things. Yeah, and I think that's really a product of my childhood. I got into music because of my older sister, and I was one of these kids whose parents, really, this sounds awful, but anything my sister did that she didn't do well, I wasn't allowed to do. Or my parents thought, well, she's gonna flake out just like her sister. So when my parents finally let me pick up an instrument, I was just all in. And so I think that's just a byproduct of that same passion. So yeah.
Well, and so tell us more about that journey. So you started on an instrument, but when did you decide to go into music as a profession? How did you find your way to being a professional musician?
Oh my goodness. Uh I wasn't raised in a family of musicians. My parents had no idea. My dad had a drum set, and my mom sang in choir, but didn't know how to read music. And so there was always music around, but not in any trained sense. And like I said, once I got my chance to actually try something, I really went all in, and I started playing flute. I actually started in percussion when I was 8, and I got really bored just hitting things, and I really wanted to hear more melody or something. And anyway, so when I switched to flute when I was 9, by the time I got to grade school and was able to do beginning band, I had already been playing, but there was no option of just getting out of beginning band. And in fact, the one year that I was in 5th grade was the one year that my school district in Tennessee decided to try 5th grade band, which failed miserably, and they never did that again. But that one year was my one year. So I was ready. And I remember very early on sitting next to other kids, friends of mine that were excited to play flute, many of which probably wanted to play flute because I told them, play flute, I play flute, this is gonna be great. And so I would find they would struggle and I would try to help them. And so I think really I always knew I'd be a teacher. And of course I wanted to be a performer, but I think the teaching, by the time I was a freshman in high school, it became very obvious to me that that was something that I enjoyed, and the kind of like helpfulness and nurturing aspect of it, and being able to just share, anything that I knew with someone else became very obvious to me. So, even so by the time I was a freshman, I knew I want to get my doctorate. I wanted to do flute performance, but I knew I wanted to do it from the perspective of going into teaching at the academic level, and here we are.
Very cool. So we have a question from Sydney Silva, who wanted to know why the flute? Why not other band instruments? Why not brass? Or why didn't you become a string player? What was the thing that drew you to the flute specifically?
Honestly, I did not want to play flute. My sister, as I mentioned, was 3.5 years older than me. And she played saxophone and then switched to oboe. Many of her friends played flute. And so I kind of didn't want to play it because I thought everyone else played it. What I really wanted to play was clarinet. And when we went into our local music store, the Band Room in Hendersonville, Tennessee, which is no longer there, when we went in to meet the woodwind specialist at the store, he gave me a clarinet, but at that time my fingers were so small that they couldn't cover the holes. And so, and I wanted to play trumpet, honestly. I wanted to play a brass instrument. I was really drawn to horn and trumpet, but I could not stand the buzzing. I just couldn't stand the sensation. So the music teacher, whose name is Ken Osmick, he's still a very popular, famous gigging musician in Nashville. He plays all the woodwind instruments. He said, "You have perfect lips for flute." And I now know that he means I don't have lips, and that's, I guess, good for flute. And so I really didn't want to play flute, but I remember going home and I had a record player and I had some records, and I remember listening to the flute and thinking, I think I can get behind this. I think I like this instrument. And so it kind of grew on me, and it was so much more enjoyable than percussion. That I just really couldn't get enough of it. I mean, my punishment and it was, taking my flute away. So anyway, yeah. And I will say that I would love to play lots of other instruments, and I kind of have, since then in college, working on my doctorate, fell into the recorder and the Baroque flute. But I know lots of musicians that change instruments just like I did. And so I tell students all the time, if you're interested in another instrument, try it. Of course, you need to focus on one thing, but lots of people, or I don't know if they do this anymore, but it used to be that people would get to college and even decide to change instruments. But I don't think that really happens so much anymore.
Well, and a lot of flute players also play saxophone, right? Is that something that you ever did? I mean, I certainly knew a lot of flute players in high school who would also play sax in jazz band or something like that.
So I don't know if it's the vibration of the reed. I just don't like that sensation on my lips. And when I was in high school, I played, my sister had an alto, so I could play it, and I sometimes would, but I don't know, physical sensation is important. And I think that was also something that I missed or didn't get from percussion as much. And so, yeah.
Not your thing.
Not my thing. Yeah. No, but the fingerings are very similar. And it's certainly, if you're looking to try another instrument, it's probably the easiest one to try for that reason.
Well, so, one of the things that I've had actually a number of people ask me over the last couple of years is, why Dr. Hayes? You are the only member of the YOSA conducting faculty with a doctorate. And so, I had one student ask me, is she a dentist? And I said, no, she has a doctorate in music. So I think there are a lot of students who don't even necessarily realize that's a thing. So can you talk to us about what does that mean? Why, how do you become Dr. Hayes? How did you get a doctorate in music? And how is that different from other kinds of training or study for college and graduate students? What does a doctorate in music mean?
Okay, so I think that's an excellent question. A doctorate in general is just a term for a terminative degree. So the final degree, meaning you have, in theory, been able to study at a level that only a few people have, and it usually culminates with some kind of research paper, dissertation, treatise, where you have to have an original paper about a research topic. But it's typically you get a bachelor's degree, you get a master's degree, and then if you want to keep going, then for musicians, there's usually two options: a performance certificate or a doctorate. And you can get a doctorate in performance, which is what mine is in, conducting pretty much any area that you can think of would offer a terminative degree or a doctorate degree. Mine is specifically not a PhD, but a DM, which is a Doctor of Music, as opposed to a PhD, which is a Doctor of Philosophy. And really the distinction is just in terms of the criteria for the specific degree, but they're still like the same classification of degrees. So yeah, and why doctor? I remember when I was getting my undergrad degree, everyone at my school was doctor. Most people were Dr. someone, and I think I remember thinking, am I going to make people call me Dr. Hayes? Am I going to make people call me Dr. Kristin? Dr. something. And I think it's just like, once you've gone through that enormous ordeal of getting a doctorate, you wear it proudly, and it is such a process that it's certainly something that if anyone's considering doing it, I would say to have a clear idea of what you would want to focus on. Luckily, today, a lot of schools are shifting away from the research element and more to the performance aspect. So rather than having to write a 150-page paper, as I did, you might just have to perform a few more recitals, which, great, isn't that what we want to do anyway? But I really valued the research element of my doctorate at Florida State, because that helped me dive into the early music in a slightly different way. But anyway, yeah.
So, I actually have worked in colleges and universities a lot throughout the last 15 or 20 years. And I'm very familiar with that idea of everybody being called doctor, because I'm not. I've actually had a couple of situations where students will say, "Oh, Dr. Peters," and another member of the faculty will say, "You should call him Professor Peters."
Yeah.
Like, I would have corrected them. You don't need to do that for me. It's okay. But yeah, I didn't get a doctorate. I was actually in a doctoral program in music composition, and was on my way to getting a doctorate. And then at the age of 26, I got offered a conducting job. And I thought to myself, as a 26-year-old, well, I could go and conduct and get paid to do that, or I could stay here and keep writing massive papers and sitting in classes from time to time. And I think I'm going to go conduct.
Yeah.
And later, as predicted, I sort of my mom at the time said, "You may regret this." And later, there were times where I thought it would be nice to have that degree. But I have to say, for me, for what I've done with my life and the career I've pursued as a conductor, it made a lot more sense to be getting practical experience working with orchestras. And so I really don't regret that decision, except that it would be nice for people to call me Dr. Peters, but don't nobody call me Dr. Peters. That would be wrong.
I think that's it. I think that's it. I mean, I hate to say it, but and I'm really honest with my college students about education, higher education, and the cost and the prospects of getting a doctorate and what benefits or downsides there might be to that. And the world is constantly changing. I mean, when I entered Florida State for my doctorate, it was 2006, so right before the Great Recession. So when I got done with school, there were no jobs. And I would say that since then, I hate to be bleak, or I don't know, but it's just really hard for me to encourage students to get doctorates. Depending on what they want to do, the financial cost is something that you really do have to consider. And I was lucky to have an assistantship, but I didn't start with an assistantship. I worked full time for the first year and a half of my doctorate. I worked at a retail clothing store from like 9 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock. I go to orchestra rehearsal from 7 to 9. I mean, I until I got that assistantship, I had to work full time, and it's not something that I would recommend. And I'm grateful I have it, but it's also something I'm glad is over. So,
Well, YOSA alum Paula Wilson actually asked that very question. In your opinion, do you need a graduate degree to be able to have a successful career as a performer? And Paula is a really fine flutist herself. She's an undergraduate student right now. So what's your sense on that? Is it a necessity? Is it an advantage? What do you think?
I think that it depends on, you need to get the training for the job that you want to do. So I'm assuming that Miss Paula, who I know and adore, is probably talking more about orchestral careers. And maybe not, but I would say, the benefit of continuing your education through grad program or a doctorate is that you have this kind of built-in resource of really talented musicians that are going to keep you competitive with them and with yourselves. You're going to have great orchestras or ensembles, chamber ensembles. You have a lot of opportunities that are built into the structure. And so, of course, going and getting an advanced degree is going to provide you with this really solid place to do that. That doesn't mean that you have to have that. I think if you take lessons and create your own opportunities, being once you get out of school, no one cares where you went to school. I mean, it's really about what you can do. And young people win really great jobs all the time because they're killer players. And so I think it's not that simple, unfortunately. So you have to really think about what you're seeking, what your kind of like 5-year, 10-year, 20-year. I mean, I honestly never thought that I would, the idea in undergraduate school of teaching middle school flute players was terrifying to me. Terrifying. And now I adore this. I'm not the same person I was then. So I think keeping that in mind, a balance and having a well-rounded education. And so, for me, my undergrad was at a small state school. I was, big fish and small pond, got lots of nurturing and, lots of confidence. And then to go to a conservatory for my master's degree kicked my butt and made me realize, oh, wait, I need to get it together. And then to go to Florida State, like a huge program with just enormous, amount of resources and support system, and a studio that big. So I knew that I wanted that. I knew that I wanted all of my educational experiences to be as diverse as possible, because I knew that I wanted to teach. I knew I wanted to teach college, and I knew that ultimately that would be very different depending on where I might end up. And so to be at St. Mary's, which is a very small liberal arts school, it's perfect. It's nothing that I actually experienced when I was in school, but I feel very prepared for it because I have, or really even when I taught at UTSA or Our Lady of the Lake, to just be able to have a diverse education, I think, is really important. And you can get that in many ways, but of course going to grad school kind of makes it built in and easier to achieve.
I had somebody give me advice when I was in my 20s, and I was talking about, I'm studying composition now, I want to become a conductor, and what's the pathway? And it was somebody who looked me in the eye and said, there is no one pathway. In the career of performing musician, every single person on stage has a different resume. And so if you look at the woodwind players, for example, in the Cleveland Orchestra, there are people in the woodwind section of the Cleveland Orchestra who have PhDs. There are people in the woodwind section of the Cleveland Orchestra who won the job while they were freshmen in college.
It's wild.
And everything in between. So the path you take has to be about becoming the best musician you can be, and finding as many opportunities as you can. And sometimes you have to be flexible. Well, and of course now, Paula also asked about what does the post-COVID-19 musical world look like? And with where we stand today, that idea that you have to be flexible and build your portfolio of skills is more true than ever. In a way, there might be an interesting opportunity for people who are entering the field right now, because you have a little bit of a timeout in a way to hone your skills and develop your skills even more. I'm curious about your thoughts about performance as we hopefully come out of this over the next couple of years. My sense is that the research is just starting to be done to really know how many flute players can you put in a room, and how much space do we need between them, and all those kinds of things. But do you have any thoughts about when or how you'll feel comfortable performing again? Most musicians I know are thinking about this a lot, and most of us are going, we still need to figure more of this out.
Yeah, I have these thoughts every time I'm, teaching a lesson over, when is the next time I'm going to be able to sit face to face with a student? I think about these practice rooms at the middle schools and high schools, which are wonderful resources, but there's no way you can find 6 feet of distance between, and then to have this flute, I'll be practicing a lot more recorder. No, I don't know. I think I think in many ways it's terrifying, to be totally honest. I mean, singing and flute playing, no mouthpiece. It's all out there. I think of the number of times I've gotten in a beginner's face and, trying to look in their lips and see what's going on. And, so there's that. And of course, as far as playing, there's plexiglass, but I don't know. I know there's been some research done with aerosols and experimenting with how they travel through other instruments. And of course, this hasn't been done on flute because we know We know where that air is going. So I really I know there's been the head joint where I can't even remember what it is, but someone makes a head joint where it goes in front of the flute, but that's the same problem where the air is just escaping. So aside from having like a shield in front of the flute player, I really can't imagine. I mean, the air is going to have to come out, otherwise it's not a flute. But what I've been telling my students, and what I think about is, World War II and instruments being burned down to create ammunition, and all the metals being used for that, and instruments being turned into that. If we can come back from that, we'll figure this out.
Yeah.
And there are people that are working on it, but it's certainly it's a slightly scary thing to think about, the unknown part of that. Yeah.
Well, and I think about a lot of people have been talking about the 1918 flu pandemic. I almost said flute pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's another story. Yes.
The 1918 Spanish flu pandemic was hugely disruptive to the performing arts for a couple of years. There was a period in New York and Paris and London and lots of other places where for 2 years there were hardly any concerts. In San Antonio, Fiesta went away for 2 years during that 1918 pandemic. And I'm not saying that we're therefore on a 2-year timeline, but what I'm saying is that happened. And at that time, then people were thinking, will we ever come back from this? Well, then in the 1920s, you had a huge bursting of culture. And, not to get all music history geeky on you, but Stravinsky, who had been writing these huge ballet scores in the early part of the teens, he wrote The Firebird and The Rite of Spring and Petrushka for these giant orchestras. Well, the Spanish flu pandemic happened in 1918, and he just started to write for smaller groups of instruments with more space between them. And the most famous piece that came out of that was called The Soldier's Tale, as you know, Dr. Hayes. And this amazing piece of chamber music that we wouldn't have if it weren't for this.
Right.
And then when things turned around and the world moved on, he went in a different direction. So my point is, I keep trying to remind myself that this is an opportunity for us to find new paths, new ways of being creative. I mean, these kind of online performance videos that we see people doing, we've never seen the volume of that kind of thing. And it's not we want this to be the only kind of music we're doing. But we're getting some really cool, interesting projects out of that. So, there's opportunity too.
I do think there's a lot of potential, of course, not only for like combinations of electronic and live sounds, acoustic sounds, and things like that, but chamber music. And I mean, I love playing in orchestra. I love playing in band. I love these things, but I've been for years a really big advocate of chamber music, because, when you get out of college, if you don't get that orchestra job, if you don't play in a community band, your best bet at continuing to be a musician is to play chamber music, because it's easier to find a few friends to play with than 50 friends to play with, logistically speaking. So I do think it's an exciting time for that. And I know composers are just furiously working on things. And it's just so weird. It seems like it's all happening so fast, but so slow at the same time. I certainly hope that things go back to some sort of normal. I'd love for my kids, I think about my 8th graders who would love to go to their first day of high school. There's just luckily I didn't have any seniors at St. Mary's this year, but to think about them leaving like this, and I know you have some at UTSA, and it's a very interesting time, and it's one that they'll be able to tell their kids about, and hopefully we won't live through for too long. But right. I think music is so resilient. I mean, before we could speak, we were uttering sounds and groaning at each other in caves. So, we will find a way to continue to communicate through music.
And it's a
Hopefully.
source of solace right now, right? I mean, the chance to engage with music, for me, I know over the last couple of months has been a huge source of consolation and hope. And it doesn't mean I know what the path forward is, but I know that for all the musicians who are watching, it's really important to stay in touch with your instrument, to keep making
Yes.
music, to keep practicing, because you will feel better when you do that work. You won't necessarily feel better every moment of the way, right? Part of practicing is that there are moments in the journey that stink, but that overall, that journey of moving forward as a musician will put you in a place where your heart and your soul and your psychology are in a better place.
Yeah. I mean, one way that I've actually found that my private students are getting so much better right now because, and when I was in college, you go through the embouchure change. You have to, change something in the way that you're playing, and it's really traumatic. And but I have to go to orchestra today, and I have to sound good. I can't change this thing permanently because I have to sound good in 10 minutes. And so because my kids don't have band every day, we can actually get better at things. Not to knock their daily band thing, but on the other hand, they're used to playing for 45 minutes every day in band, and they don't do that anymore. So you have to remind them, do it at least 45 minutes a day. It's just so different when they don't have the structure. So that would be my biggest thing. Keep providing your own structure, because this is, no matter what you do, you're eventually going to have to grow up and manage your time. And so this is a good time to learn how to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and for me, I've actually been really focused on that thing of trying to develop routines, trying to make sure that I'm not just kind of, it's easy to let Netflix consume more of my time than I should, not during the workday, but at other times, carving out times to really focus on musical projects has been important. We have one more question before we wrap up.
Okay.
And it's another YOSA alum, Papa Udita Hana, is asking about
Hey, Papa.
how to stay motivated to practice while we're inside and at home. So we're sort of talking about that right now, but what about for you? Are there things that you're using to motivate yourself to stay connected to your instrument?
I think variety it goes back to who I am and kind of my life and how I have to have lots of different things. So, one thing that Eric and I have both been doing is kind of 20-minute timer, sit down and practice piano for a little while, and then 20-minute timer, sit down and play recorder for a little while. I am really big on structure personally. I think that if I didn't have that, I'd get nothing done. So I kind of have a routine that I follow every day, whether it's starting with the same kind of exercises and just kind of modifying a little bit differently. But what I'm finding is really keeping me inspired is just doing a lot of different things. And I don't every day feel like playing all these instruments, but to just get my hands on them for a few minutes every day makes me it just makes me feel better, and to hear the different colors. And that's one of the things I miss in the orchestra. You get to hear all these different sounds, and and I can put on records and I can listen to music, but it's different when you get to experience it and feel the vibration. And so I think that's kind of why I keep fluttering around, because I just personally, so I think it's just knowing what you need. And my best way of setting goals is just think about what your strengths are, think about what your weaknesses are. What do you need to do to kind of balance that? And if you're only working on your weaknesses, you're not going to be very motivated. So you've got to make yourself feel good at the same time. And so try to find a good amount of balance and technique and goals, but also variety in what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, and I think I was having a conversation recently with a friend of mine who's a musician in the Philadelphia Orchestra, and she said, to be honest with you, the last 10 years or so, I have bad days at work more often than I have good days. I don't always look forward to playing in the orchestra. But right now, it is so easy for me to practice because for the rest of my life, I now know what it's like for the orchestra to go away. And I want to show up and make the most beautiful sounds I can to contribute to that from here on out. And so I'm going to work my tail off right now so that when we are able to do this again, it'll be the best day of my life.
I think that's how everyone feels, honestly. I mean, absolutely. Who could take this for granted, who hasn't had a performance? It's affected every person I know. And I think we were all kind of going about life as normal, and that's what you do, and that's healthy too. But I think this perspective has definitely made us all really appreciate not only what we have, but the history that's been given to us, that this has continued, and it's up to us to continue it from here.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Hayes, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Of course.
Again, we want to wish Happy Mother's Day to everybody out there. We will be back next Sunday. We're going to be having a chat next Sunday with Eric Cavazos, who is the conductor of YOSA Sinfonietta strings. And then actually, we have a big announcement coming after that. We are going to start 2 weeks from today with the launch of a series of guests from outside of YOSA. So we'll keep doing weekly YOSA Live chats, and we're going to have really well-known figures coming in as guests. I can tell you that in the first few weeks, we have a Pulitzer Prize-winning composer, and we have a conductor who is music director of not only a major orchestra in the United States, but also a major orchestra in Europe. And we have several other people coming up who are players in some of the top orchestras in the United States and soloists. And so it's going to be a really cool series. And within the next week or so, we'll start to announce those guests. So we're hoping that each Sunday throughout the summer, you'll be able to tune in and get to know these musicians who are all going to share their own journey to becoming professionals, and also how they're thinking about the time that we're living through right now. So Dr. Hayes, thanks again. Any closing thoughts?
No, I hope this has been informative and beneficial, and I can't wait to see my students again and to see you in person. And anyway, thanks for the questions. And I love my YOSA family.
We all miss you guys so much. Everybody at YOSA, keep your head up, keep practicing, keep washing your hands.
Yes.
We live in this time where lots of things are opening back up. Make sure you're taking care of yourself and your family, and that you're prioritizing your health, because it's a really important thing for you to stay healthy. Thanks so much to everybody, and we will see you again next Sunday. Take care.